Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's presentation, a webcast by NYSERDA, DASNY, and SUNY on upcoming opportunities in net zero energy building. We have several presenters for today, but before we get started with that, I just wanted to remind attending participants or walk you through how to ask questions in today's presentation. On the screen in front of you, you'll see the first slide to our slide deck for the day. When you move your mouse, some options will appear or functions will appear at the bottom of your screen. The most important are two. When you hover over the one that looks like a chat bubble, you'll notice that the chat function or tooltip appears. That is where you will communicate with myself, Liz Moran, who is today's host of the training. If you have any technical issues or you need the presenter to repeat a statement or maybe to speak louder, you're going to use that chat function to communicate that information to me, and I'm happy to help you troubleshoot any issues in the background. To the right of that chat function, you'll see another icon or a button that has 3 dots in it. When you go ahead and click on that, a Q&A option will appear. Q&A will be used to submit any questions that you have for today's presenters. Again, the Q&A button should be used for any questions for the presenters. All questions will be handled at the end of today's presentation. We'll get to as many of those questions as possible, but in the event that our presenters are unable to answer all of the questions that come in, I believe that they are providing a FAQ list along with posting this recording. They will give instructions at the end of the presentation today to let you know where to find today's recording so that you can review again later or pass it on to others who might be interested. At this time, I'm going to unmute our presenters. Karen, Saul, Greg, and Jody, we are ready to get started.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Liz. This is Jody Smith-Anderson. I work for DASNY as the Director of Sustainability Programs, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar session. We're present in order to talk about opportunities that are pending regarding zero net energy retrofits. We're going to speak very broadly about the initiatives, and I have with me several people who will be able to speak to the opportunities. And I got to get to the right controls. We're going to today talk about the opportunity. The purpose of today's webinar is to inspire you to pay attention and get involved with this potential work and this planned work. We're going to talk about state and campus goals, the challenges of deep energy retrofits of existing buildings, the innovation that we really need present in order to achieve our goals, and how we're going to affect the evolving construction market and the trends that we see already. And then we'll have wrap-up and discussion and Q&A. I mentioned I have several people with me to speak to the pending projects and the opportunity. We have Karen B. Donahoe from SUNY, who's the Associate Vice Chancellor, Capital Facilities. Saul Brown from NYSERDA, who's Retrofit New York Project Manager. Greg Hale from NYSERDA, who's the Senior Advisor for Energy Efficiency Markets and Finance. And again, myself, Jody Smith-Anderson. I just hit the wrong one. All right, so there is an upcoming RFQ for zero net energy retrofit. It's a residence hall in the Mohawk Valley region. We're talking about a very typical residence hall construction circa 1960s, early 1960s. This is highly representative of our future retrofit work that we're going to be facing. And we are going to talk a little bit about the broad aspects of gut renovation with zero net energy ready solution as part of the project. And that solution is intended to be replicable with students in place over a large majority of existing building stock. At this point, I would just like to give each of the participants in this panel a moment to talk about their role from their state agency. DASNY is a New York State authority, and we're thrilled to be part of this project because we have served SUNY for more than 70 years regarding residence hall design, construction, and renovation. And we see the future of construction as pertaining to our existing building stock. New York State is blessed with a wide variety of existing buildings, and many of them can be renovated and retrofit to achieve the goals of New York State and the campuses and the various owners. Thank you for letting us be part of this opportunity. And I'd like to pass this over to Greg to speak to NYSERDA's role.
Thank you, Jody. Just make sure everybody can hear me well.
Can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So NYSERDA is the state's energy office, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and we're charged with facilitating New York's transition to a clean energy economy. And Karen's going to run through New York's current clean energy established targets, which are among the most ambitious in the U.S. And stay tuned because they may be getting a little more ambitious in the near future. So NYSERDA covers renewable energy, energy efficiency, a bunch of other things like workforce training, integration with the transportation sector, everything that we need to get to accomplish this transition to a carbon neutral economy. And our big target, long-range target, is 80% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2050. And that's already out there, and what that really requires, if you look at it and analyze what's needed, is a carbon neutral building stock for the entire state by the middle of this century. So that's an extremely, it's daunting, but it's a huge opportunity for developing these net zero retrofits. And we all know that most of the buildings that will be here in 2050 already exist today. So we can't get there just by building everything new to net zero, which we should be doing. But we must get at the existing building stock. So NYSERDA just announced a new near-term energy efficiency target for Earth Day, which was 185 trillion BTU reduction in energy, in site energy use by 2025, which will get us a third of the way to our kind of interim term goal of 40% reduction by 2030. Sorry to be throwing all these numbers at you. But the point is that we're getting aggressive on the near term, supercharging the utility efficiency programs, but that's not going to get us all the way to net zero carbon. So we really need to concurrently move forward on this deep retrofit path, and that's what Retrofit New York is all about. NYSERDA is developing a roadmap for getting our entire building stock to net zero carbon, so we're actually undertaking this action. And we know that we need to intervene in buildings that are undertaking substantial renovation, which is exactly what we have here in this opportunity. But we also need to develop, as Jody mentioned, this replicable and cost-effective solution for net zero retrofits without emptying the buildings. So this would mean for SUNY, when the dorms are vacant for summer and then anything beyond that would be done with students in place. So one of the major tools of getting where we need to get to is leading by example. And that means with the state's own assets, our state-owned buildings. And there's no better partner for us in this mission than SUNY, with a large building stock, a chancellor who shares our carbon neutral goals. So we're really excited to be working with SUNY and DASNY on this project, and we'll get into the project a little more in a few slides.
Thank you, Greg. We're going to turn it over to Karen to speak to SUNY's goals in this work and their role.
Great. Thank you, Greg and Jody. SUNY's engaged in this because, as Greg mentioned, we are a big part of the state. We are actually 40% of the state facilities, and therefore a major piece of what has to improve in order to reach those very aggressive goals. And not only that, but lead by example is key to SUNY, not only within the state, but we are also taking major role in leading across the country with higher ed and beyond the United States into the world. This is a very, very important piece of that because, as you said, this is a different section of it, and it takes care of our existing stock. So we're thrilled to be a part of this, and we'll get into more of the details as we get into it. But right now, our chancellor has set some major goals. 100% renewable grid-sourced electricity. We're working on that as a separate project. The deep energy retrofits, that is this. New buildings will be zero net energy as well. And then we are working closely with NYSERDA and others on clean energy workforce development, another really important piece of this whole picture. Thank you.
Excellent. So I would just like to recap that little bit of an opening. We've got DASNY, NYSERDA, and SUNY working together on this project. The only missing piece at this point are the design build teams and manufacturing that will make retrofitting existing buildings truly possible. And you should be intrigued and excited at this point listening to this webinar and seeing these slides. I want to restate that we have an incredible array of existing building stock. And this project is teed up to help us understand how to renovate it in a way that is replicable, cost reasonable in the market, and to compress those costs over time. The work needs to be done well in order to reduce loss of embodied carbon and also to reduce carbon emissions through operations and new building construction. So I hope you're titillated, I guess, as we move forward with a little more detail. At this point, we'd like to talk about some of the opportunities other than our massive amounts of wonderful building stock. And Karen, can you give us some insights?
Certainly. So SUNY's goal, big, zero net carbon for all of our campuses. That's our ultimate goal. But there are a lot of things that will help get us there. Again, working together, we want to work on something that's replicable. Our stock of res halls is all very similar stock that was built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and an easy place to start. We want to move this project, once we really get good at these res halls, we want to move into our academic buildings as well. But the res halls are a great place to start because of that similarity of hall to hall, often with one complex having 4 or 5 practically identical buildings. So it's a good way to create a replicable project path. The retrofit solutions will also help improve our students' quality of life. This is something that's very important to us. We're always trying to keep the student as part of our focus. And of course, we're really happy to support the overall program that NYSERDA has started and being a big part of that. On the right-hand side of the goals of the slide, you see the major goal, and that is an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2050. That's the 80 by 50 goal. We're right now working more on the 40 by 30 goal, which we're getting very close to, but there's a lot of the easy work that's already been done, making it tougher to get to that next 80% big goal. The 50% renewable electricity across the state, needing to have that as part of, again, the governor's goals, and that 185 trillion BTUs that Greg already mentioned is a major goal by 2025. A lot of things that we are working toward, and there's a lot of work, and your help is going to be critical as we work toward this. So what we know is that in the examples that have been done elsewhere, retrofit projects can yield a 50 to 75% energy reduction. But to do this, we have to look at things differently. And my panel mates will chuckle when I say this because it's my thing that I keep saying, and that is, you don't do one without the other. What does that mean? We can no longer do HVAC retrofits in a building without doing the envelope. We can no longer do the envelope without doing HVAC retrofits. The two are so intertwined that they have to be done together. And in the past, we often didn't do major envelope retrofits because they were on their own not energy efficient enough. They didn't meet all of those criteria. But when you combine that with then a more efficient heating cooling system, you can have an overall big impact on your building. So transforming the way we do it, don't do one without the other. HVAC and your envelope have to be done as a joint project. So how much do we have at SUNY? Well, you know, there are in the area of 500 residence halls, 70,000 beds. That's a lot of real estate, a lot of buildings. Most of those built in the 70s, 80s, some of them in the 60s. They are all handled by the revenue that's generated. So no state money goes into our residence halls. Our residence halls are funded by the revenue of the students paying to live on campus. And so everything that we do has to be affordable within that revenue stream, including all bonding and all debt service associated with that. But as I mentioned before, we have a lot of similar building types. Therefore, a similar solution will be replicable and be able to expand and grow the market for this solution. So we're really excited about this.
And Greg, you're going to talk a little bit about other market traction that's in existence.
Yeah, so thanks, guys, and great overview, Karen. The goal of Retrofit New York is nothing short of jump-starting a new industry that's capable of developing and delivering net zero retrofits. And the key to this is scale. Karen just gave you a bunch of info on the scale of SUNY, and she isn't even starting to talk about the academic facilities, and we haven't even started talking about all the other higher education institutions in the state, let alone the region. So just in the academic institutional sector, there's a lot of opportunity. But we actually started Retrofit New York in the affordable housing market in New York, and we're partnered with all of the housing agencies, as we'll see in a second. But there's enormous scale here as well, and just in the affordable sector. So if we take, we got 1.7 million units in the state, and if we say that we'll just get to half of them in a 20-year cycle, that means 40,000 units a year and roughly a $1.2 billion annual market in affordable housing. And again, that's not market rate, that's not other states that we're also talking about. So point being, there's a huge economic opportunity, and that's one of the things that we're doing with Retrofit New York is aggregating the demand and demonstrating that demand to encourage the industry to get in and help us join us in developing and refining the solutions. It's really up to you guys on the phone to come in and get involved and design the right solutions. And by doing that and doing enough of it, we can get the cost to where we need to. Next slide. So as I mentioned, you got SUNY right at the top there, but we're also working with HCR and the New York City affordable agencies. We are working with NYCHA. They have 180,000 apartment units in their universal loan, and we're expecting an RFP for a net zero retrofit from NYCHA to come out in the first quarter. And we're not stopping with New York State, so we're in discussions with California. We're in discussions with Massachusetts, which is in the grid here. Massachusetts, Boston, Chicago, Indiana. We've been talking with Canadian entities, both the national government and a couple of the provinces. So the point is that we have all of these sources of demand, and what we're trying to get to, as I've forgotten whether it's Karen and Jody alluded, is getting to the manufacturing sector and innovating in the way construction is done, both for new construction and for retrofits, and getting to an advanced manufacturing component design. And we've got partners with DOE, the Department of Energy, and national labs in helping us convene manufacturers to undertake this mission as well. So Retrofit New York has no financial interest in any of this. We sit in the center as a catalyst. And Saul's going to get into this on the essentials of the Energy Sprong model, which is a Dutch solution or a Dutch program that's developed solutions. And that's one encouraging thing is we're not starting from scratch. We've got a model to follow. But what we do is we get together the demand side that I've talked about, the supply side by convening, and here we are showing you what that looks like. And then we also address financing issues, regulatory issues, which are both a little more thorny on the affordable housing side than SUNY, although I can also mention that I've had a bunch of interest expressed in actually coming in and helping finance SUNY net zero retrofits. So yeah, we sit in the middle and we're really trying to smooth the path for this market and get it going.
So Saul, Greg mentioned that you'll be talking more about Energy Sprong. It's a very exciting process, and we'd love to hear from you on this.
Excellent. Thank you both. So important thing to remember is, as Greg said, none of you are starting from scratch. There's actually a lot to build on in terms of how the market has been moved already and a momentum that you can take advantage of. Retrofit New York itself is inspired by the Dutch model, Energy Sprong, which was founded almost about 10 years ago in the Netherlands. And as you can see from these pictures, has really begun to revolutionize the way existing affordable housing is brought to net zero energy performance. What they did was they didn't start out saying, what is the state of the industry and how can we meet the country's ambitious climate goals? They went the other way. They said, what are our climate goals and how and what do we need to do? What revolutionary measures do we need to create to get to those goals? And what they came up with is pretty extraordinary. So what you see here is the end product. What you're looking at is basically an envelope wrap of an existing house, and you can see the sort of tail of the before on a lot of the left side of these photos, with the finished product being on the right. They basically did an envelope wrap around the entire surface to bring it to passive house levels of performance. That greatly reduced the loads required for the mechanical systems. Those were actually consolidated in a pod that's serviceable from the outside of the building. In the example on the far right, you can see that white column. That houses the entire building's mechanical systems, and again, they're fully usable from the sorry, the screen just went dead there for a second. Fully serviceable from the exterior. They then went to put PV panels on the roof and got to net zero energy performance. That's pretty extraordinary. And they didn't just do it after months and months. They basically come in there with a laser scanner, scan the entire building, do the majority of the construction off-site, and then install it in about 1 to 2 days on-site. So when Jody said the solution that we're going to be targeting should be replicable with residents in place, even though we're beginning with a gut rehab, this is the precedent for that actually being possible. And the success of this in the Netherlands leads to it now being rolled out in the United Kingdom, Germany, France. Actually, Italy has begun to start their pilot projects. And what we're hoping is here in New York State as well. Next slide. But again, equally important, they've also been concentrating on the finances of the whole. And as you can possibly tell from this slide, starting in 2010 at around $145,000 a unit, they rapidly brought this down to about $65,000 a unit in only 3 years, and they're on track to go even below that to a moderate rehab scale of proportions. So that's a 40% reduction in the 40% of cost of their original starting point with the initial pilots. They've done 2,500 retrofits already. If we can just go back 1 second. They've also done 2,500 new construction, which, again, the technology that they've developed, I think you can imagine from the image you saw, is also applicable to new construction projects as well when starting out at net zero, and they have 20,000 more in the pipeline. Next. So we decided to build off the success. We've been conferring closely with the founders of Energy Sprong. They've been here advising us and continue to provide support to the solution provider teams that are now mobilized and creating solutions for us. What you see here is actually the list of criteria on the RFP that NYSERDA published for Retrofit New York at the beginning of this year. And again, the goals of our program are to achieve net zero energy performance, but also at the same time improve resident quality of life, develop solutions that are adaptable to the same types of buildings, a similar typology, minimize disruption to residents, minimize on-site construction period and construction costs, contribute to the building's resiliency, and ultimately develop solutions that are financeable and scalable at major proportions. Next. So this is an overview of the 6 projects we're currently working on. We have 3 in New York City, 3 more upstate. The ones in New York City range from 4 stories to 6 stories, 21 units to 46 units. And I should mention about Energy Sprong, while the images you saw were for 2-story buildings, they're now tackling buildings 4 and 6 stories. So the typologies that we're looking at now, while they certainly have their challenges, are also have precedent in terms of actually being successful. So that's what we're targeting at this point. Next slide. We also have 3 projects upstate. These are all 2-story buildings throughout the state, as you can see, from the eastern side to the western, varying from 18 units to 40 units. And you can see we have a variety of owners involved in these projects, a variety of teams. When it says team, that's the team leader, though they're highly integrated teams representing architects, engineers, builders, energy performance specialists, and manufacturers. So you're really talking about integrated teams who have now reaching the end of the design phase, and we're hoping all of these projects are going to go to construction the beginning of next year. Thanks.
That's wonderful, Saul. You saw the examples in New York City and upstate, and just to make the point clear that Saul made, in this slide, in the center you see a 4-story existing building in its existing condition. This is in the Netherlands, and the picture to the right of that is after its retrofit work and its zero net energy goal achievement. So that is very clear. If you look at the picture fully on the left, that is also an existing building that has gone through a retrofit process. So the point here is that when we're talking with SUNY, for example, or any other clients, we want to make the point that retrofitting to zero net energy does not mean that every building is going to look the same, or that every campus has to have a retrofit solution that totally mimics in appearance every other campus. Each project can have its own identity so long as the solution at its base level is replicable in approach to get to that zero net energy goal. And this also serves to illustrate that larger buildings are well underway in Europe, and that we have the ability to learn from those projects and certainly the capacity to do that work here. Again, I'm going to just present this opportunity. You saw this slide earlier in the webinar. I think it's incredibly exciting that we have a pending opportunity we know of, and we can let you know that an RFQ is expected to come out within the next 2 months. We're not going to get into details of this particular project other than the broader brush information that's on this slide. Through the discussion and the information shared by Greg and Saul and Karen, we know that New York State has an incredible building market with a vast opportunity we invited you to this webinar because we want to help you see that opportunity and understand what needs to change perhaps, or what you need to address as far as how you're going to do work and what the goals are in order to meet New York State's goals, SUNY's goals, NYSERDA's goals, and DASNY's goals, and optimally your goals for your business and your team building. I think that's a strong message we're trying to portray. So toward this end, we just put together a list of things that we know we've talked about in our team meetings with SUNY and NYSERDA and DASNY, the things that are imperative in the work that is coming down the road. We need innovative design-build teams. Although we're dealing with buildings that exist and with problems that we're probably comfortable with and have dealt with before, we need to deal with them in a different way, and the work needs to be iterative. It needs to understand the objectives of zero net energy, of integration between building envelope, which is incredibly important for energy efficiency, and building systems. It needs to understand optimizing the experience for the building occupants while it is improving the building stock. We build buildings for people. We need to renovate them with the same objectives for their comfort and well-being. We need to have teams that have experience with high-performance buildings, and that catch-all phrase, high-performance buildings, can be net zero ready, passive house, low-energy buildings, whatever terminology you can clarify as understanding the goal set and the ways in which to achieve those goals. We need to know about that experience. We need to encourage you to reach out to the manufacturers out there, because as we've seen in the Dutch program and already in the affordable housing, manufacturing will be a key point in speeding off-site prep and facilitating the efficiency of on-site construction and of managing costs. So talking with manufacturers and engaging them in your teams early can be a huge benefit to this work. Understanding the total cost of ownership. We definitely want to bring buildings to excellent performance. We want to do so for the life of that building. And we're not talking about a 20-year building. When we renovate, we're aiming for 50 to 100 years and want to make that clear. We need experience with institutional buildings and gut renovations. At least in the first projects that are on our roster and that we're starting to talk about, these are SUNY residence hall projects, and we need to know that you can manage that campus situation and the components, the communication with the owner entities, working with state entities that are brilliantly wonderful like DASNY, SUNY, and NYSERDA. And we also want to make sure you're aware, another state goal is to create a resilient economy, and we depend upon MWBE and SDVOB partners in order to make sure that economy is resilient and well poised for all the future work we'll be doing. All right, so that was pretty much the summary. I hope the messages, the big messages, have been clear. I want to give the panelists, if we can, just a minute. If there's a wrap-up big thought from anyone, I think now's the time to say it. And I'm going to put Karen on the spot and see if she has a big wrap-up thought. And then we'll get into Q&A after we hear from each of the panelists one more time.
Thank you, Jody. Just that SUNY needs to be a big part of this, because we do believe it is critical mission for SUNY to be a leader in this area. And so we are really excited about being a pilot for this, but really looking toward the future where this becomes the norm. And that's our real goal, is to make this be the way that things are done routinely. And we need you to be a big part of that.
Excellent. Greg, do you have a big thought to leave everyone with before Q&A?
Sure. More procedural, that you know, Jody went through some of the characteristics we're looking for on the teams, and it's you know, it's likely that each of the respondents here may not have that in their company, and that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for folks to get together, potentially with partners that they haven't worked together with before, and NYSERDA is going to facilitate that with a couple of, we like to call them clearinghouse activities, where we'll have one web-based, and we're actually trying to develop a session early in the first quarter where it would be a physical networking opportunity to get together and network and find the other partners you need to fill out a complete team.
Excellent. Saul, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that's the process that we followed for the affordable housing sector with Retrofit New York and the design process we're currently in. It was very successful. There's still a lot to be learned, but that's because we're out at the forefront of this. And I think that's really the big takeaway for this session is this is new. We're talking about uncharted territory. Yes, there's great precedence in Europe. There's certainly a lot of interest, as Greg mentioned, in other states, both near and far, here in our country. But we're also going into uncharted territory. So there's a lot to be learned in terms of teams working in new ways, beginning to think from a more industrialized method for doing work. There's also a huge opportunity, because as Greg and Karen and Jody have alluded to, the stock that we're targeting now, in terms of SUNY's whole residence hall stock, in terms of the entire affordable housing stock here in New York State, that in a way, as substantial as it is potentially only a drop in the bucket of what can ultimately be tapped with this process.
What has to ultimately be tapped with this process is the way I would put it, that, you know, with the state goals, we're going to be getting all of the buildings in the state to be doing this. So it's massive.
Right. Right. And just for my summation, just refer back to that idea that 85% of the buildings that will exist in 2035 already exist today. And that figures from Architecture 2030 and the mapping of New York State and national building stock. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. We need to have the teams that can address that existing building stock with early and effective collaboration between design, construction, energy modeling, commissioning, post-occupancy evaluation assessments, manufacturing entities, and integration of those pre-construction prep and planning. And this is just, I think, a business summation, an opportunity that you need to be aware of in order to differentiate your team, because this is the future of design and construction. So with that being said, we're going to scroll through the questions and try and address them. What I'll do, if this makes sense to everyone, is just read off a question and see who can answer it best. So just a point of information, the recording from this session will be distributed sometime later this week, along with some links to resources, especially the team building resources for joining or assembling a team that will be housed at NYSERDA's website. That information will be available along with this webinar recording, and we encourage you to share the webinar recording with potential team members, other people you know who might be interested in the opportunities that are coming. We have a question from Tom, very interested in what role compartmentalization will play in this endeavor, and I'm not sure, Tom, if you can type into the chat what you mean by that. We'll get back to that question after we get a little more info from you. I hope that's okay. We are scrolling down. Are all of the existing, this is from a DASNY test, of all your existing halls equipped with fire sprinkler systems throughout? I guess that was actually a test to see if the Q&A system worked.
But the answer to that is no. Right now they are not, but when they undergo major rehabs, they must have a sprinkler system included. They do all have fire alarm system, addressable fire alarm systems.
There is a question about the distribution list to receive the RFQ when it is released. Please constantly check the contract reporter, and DASNY procurement will be sending this out through normal RFQ processes when the time comes. I know that this will be recorded. There is a question about sending a PowerPoint as a PDF, we will look into how we can attach that and share that as well. Thank you. And the RFP, as I mentioned, the RFP, I'm not sure of the dates yet. We're not certain of the RFQ dates either, although we expect it will be within the next 2 months that the RFQ will go out. There is a question here. What major sacrifices are typically made when deep retrofitting, and how is this mitigated? I'm going to dive in right off the bat and suggest that if we're making, we have to understand what's meant by sacrificing. When projects are resilient and sustainable, they are taking into account all aspects of comfort and function, as well as energy efficiency and durability. So I think it's important to understand that the owner's goals, the state goals, the programmatic goals, all of those things are part of a very complex process that needs to be handled with a design construction team and the teams involved from DASNY, SUNY, and NYSERDA in order to understand priorities and how to balance those objectives well.
Yeah, if I could add in there, Jody, again, sacrifice is an interesting choice of words. There will be impact on the residents or students of a building. We are working very carefully to minimize that. That's during the process of the retrofit. A major barrier is the current cost of these retrofits because we're not doing them at scale. We don't have the manufacturers producing these industrialized envelope solutions, et cetera. But you're spot on. At the end, it's not a sacrifice. It's a material improvement in the quality of life of the occupants. They're going to have better comfort, better acoustics. It's in the city very important that you can shut the windows and actually all of a sudden the city noise goes away. Health, lower allergens. There's all sorts of comfort benefits that come along with the energy savings.
That's an excellent point, Greg. Thank you. We have a question from Eric. How is fossil fuel-powered equipment accounted for in zero greenhouse gas emissions goal? And Karen, would you take a stab at that one?
Yes. So I'm really going to address the second part of your question, which is, are we really looking to electrify? And the answer to that is yes. The goal is to get off of fossil fuels altogether, to electrify our buildings, to look for the use of ground source heat pumps as our heat source, our cooling source. The challenge for SUNY will be that we have a number of our campuses that have central heating plants and some that have central chiller plants. And so as part of this, particularly with the heating plants, we have to work through the process of reducing the load on those heating plants, making them a little less efficient through that process, and getting to an electrified building stock as quickly as possible.
And actually, thank you, Karen. That summation and that response indicates how focused and dedicated SUNY and New York State are to this goal of getting to zero net carbon and zero net energy over time. It is going to be complex on some campuses, and it's going to be a process. We need to dedicate our team and the first pending project and projects after that. We need to dedicate ourselves to an aspect of learning from those projects in order to feed future projects, and I think that's something you should be aware of too. This is a brave new world that we're entering into.
And the other side of that coin is that, yes, we need to electrify, but we also then need to decarbonize the grid. And NYSERDA is kind of laser focused on that as well. We just issued the largest large-scale renewable energy solicitation in the nation's history, and that's the first of many to come. We're working very hard to kickstart the offshore wind industry, kind of the same way we're doing with this net zero building industry. So we're focused on both sides of that problem.
Great.
And Greg, I'm glad you mentioned that because SUNY as well is kicking off a project to get to 100% renewable energy by incentivizing additional projects to be built so that we can increase that stock of renewables in New York and achieve those goals that you are alluding to.
And actually, I just want to follow up on that additionally. I made the point earlier that retrofit solutions don't necessarily have to look the same at each campus if the core principles of those retrofit solutions can be replicable. We can have appearances that are tied to the campus personality, as they should be. In addition, I would say moving to electrifying everything will be done in different ways depending on the needs of different campuses. The things that they already have in place, the goals that they have that could feed that, like their on-campus transportation goals, for example, or their desire to maintain a certain area as green space, so they don't want to put PV there, or they are willing to try solar thermal in addition to all the other opportunities. So every campus, every project will have its own personality, and that is the way it should be in this work. We have a couple of questions I'm going to answer together. One is a question from Timothy about the intent of the webinar. Is it for contractors or for design consultants? And I would say that it's for everybody. We really need to encourage people to think of teamed approaches to this work that's coming. The follow-up to his question was, have the designs been completed or underway? The answer is absolutely not. We have not entered into any design discussions yet. We haven't reached out for any teams at this point. We do know that the existing building stock is what we're going to be working on first, and we're focusing, again, within the next 2 months, there'll be an RFQ about a project in the Mohawk Valley. The first step to get involved, what is it? That was asked by John. And the first step is to keep your eyes open for the RFQ, but before that point, to start to figure out what your team should be, what it would look like, and how you would meet these strong team goals that are listed on the webinar right now. How you build your team to achieve those high points of opportunity and change. We have a question from Pamela. Will we provide additional funding for these strategies? NYSERDA, do you want to weigh in on this at this point?
Sure. So the goal is not to just design something cool and then show it in the library. We're planning to implement it on a dormitory and then several more. So NYSERDA does have some funding dedicated to filling in the missing money in the initial retrofits, but we're also laser focused on trying to figure out how we can reduce the entire cost of the project as much as possible and still meet the programming goals of SUNY and the energy goals of the three agencies. And that, again, as Jody has been hammering, it is about thinking differently and being innovative in the way that we approach the projects. But so the bottom line is, yes, there is additional funding that we believe will be sufficient to get this project built.
Yeah, I would build on that. The communication aspects in this design and construction work will be a key point. And communication not only to reiterate and define the goals that will be part of the project and that fit into SUNY and New York State goals, but also to understand the campus needs, the programmatic needs, any renovation work that needs to be done, especially in the first few projects. They'll probably be linked with renovation work for the residence hall, and to understand the priority of that goal achievement so that decisions can be clear and made throughout the project. Communication skills, highlight those in your team building and in any kind of responses as you move forward. We have a question about SHPO issues from Indu. Energy efficiency, in the question, she says, energy efficiency is often overruled by historic preservation folks. I would suggest that probably the building stock we're talking about at this point is not going to run into those problems as often as some other building stock may. However, what we have discovered over time is that SHPO has been working well with energy efficiency goals if those goals are clearly stated and if we're willing to work with them on how to achieve the energy efficiency goals while respecting historic preservation goals. So again, that's a balanced state, and it will be part of communication and project development going forward. And I hope that starts to answer the question, Indu. Let's see, why only the design-build approach with this important topic? Excellent. So one of the things that, and I'm going to dive in and other people can absolutely weigh in, when you have design, bid, and build, it is incredibly difficult to bring the perspectives of the construction world into the process of design. And it's also, I would say, near impossible to collaborate with manufacturing. And what we have seen through the Energy Sprong example is that we need to work collaboratively so that the designs are not just informed by what's available off the shelf in manufacturing and what contractors are used to, but the design needs to say, hey, we can go here, manufacturers, can you do this? And then the design needs to change if the manufacturers say, no, but we can do this. So that's why we need design-build approach. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be exactly perfect, but it's a better entity for achieving that collaboration than design, bid, build.
And to keep a lid on the cost is what the experience has shown us. And what you're trying to avoid is the architects and engineers coming up with a really cool solution and getting it down to detailed drawings enough to bid out to the construction industry, and then the construction people coming back and showing that the design is just not feasible within the allotted budget. So having everybody at the table from the beginning is a way to avoid that.
Yeah, and if you look at the Energy Sprong model to begin with, I mean, they have basically 6 integrated solution provider team manufacturers serving most of that market right now because they combine all the different manufacturing, construction, design, scanning capabilities that are required to successfully produce these products, guarantee their performance, and do so at increasingly reasonable costs. So if we're talking about that type of end product, that's really the route you need to get there.
All right, so we've got a question from Daniel. Are any of the European solutions applicable here? What we're doing is and NYSERDA has been key in this process. We're learning directly from the Energy Sprong teams and from their work to date. We're going to be learning from the affordable housing work that's already underway. I would suggest that we will be learning a lot. I also suspect, and Sol and Greg weigh into this, that we can't just take a solution that's perfect for the Netherlands and move it here. Having lived in the Netherlands, I can almost guarantee that's true. We can't just pluck up their stuff and put it here. They have a very constant building type, and we're approaching that constant building type by focusing on, for example, residence halls as one type that we can address.
Correct, and that's one of the reasons that we're actually going through this initial pilot phase in the affordable housing projects is to see what is replicable, what is transferable, and what is really unique to the conditions we find in New York State, both in terms of regulatory requirements, also climatic conditions. So all of these factors are at play, but again, it's getting those kinks worked out by the first movers in this area that really presents an amazing opportunity.
Great. I just want to point out we've got a little more than 5 minutes left on our webinar. We're going to address a few more questions and then do a wrap-up. Rest assured, if you have typed in a question to Q&A, We will be capturing that and addressing it in some form, probably through, as Liz mentioned, an FAQ outreach or a link to some answers as we move forward. There's a question about Phoenix, New York building, and I'm not sure if maybe Kat was referencing the Netherlands, the Dutch projects, but it's a question about buildings that include porches, and can we speak to how design challenges are being approached, especially designs that aren't boxes. Just a general statement, we have referenced quite often a panelized applied system with PV panels as part of the roofing retrofit, because that's what Energy Sprong has done in the Netherlands, and that's some of what's being seen in the affordable housing so far. The reason we want innovative design build teams is because we know that we don't know enough to decide how this should be done. We need those teams to create the solutions that will be replicable, will be cost effective. It's on you guys. We're gleefully welcoming you to this table, and we want your insights. So that the design challenge is being dealt with in a team approach, weighing on your innovative capabilities and your willingness to look at the possibilities, and our in-house expertise and whatever resources we can also bring to the table.
Yeah, and I can speak quickly to the Phoenix project. That's the Rock Property King and King project. They could actually answer. I think a couple of them are on the call listening. But it's not just the team, but it's also the building owner. So we considered on that project enclosing the porches, and that's certainly a potential solution. On that project, the owner felt that the residents wanted the porches to remain to the exterior, so they are not being enclosed, but they'll do the air barrier seal by replacing the door out to the porch. But they are enclosing the large enclosure that you might have seen in that photograph, the large opening that feeds into the interior stairway. So we'll close that space off and gain some efficiency through that.
Okay, the next question we have is, will the procurement process follow the same approach as all other SUNY contract awards? This is a challenge for some smaller firms that have not had prior SUNY experience.
So, no, this won't be the typical approach because, again, we are going with the design build. And in the design build process, the RFQ that's going out is looking for qualifications of design build teams, where it is the team that is being judged, and certainly smaller firms that have a combination of team members are going to be very eligible for this. The other thing about that is, again, we're working with DASNY because DASNY has design build authority to do this for SUNY. We don't have that for our other types of projects, but right now through DASNY we can do design build, and that does allow smaller teams to partner with others and end up being a part of this overall solution.
All right, so one comment about having manufacturers involved early will assist with the final installation and production, but however, most are hesitant to devote too many man-hours in the design process due to non-proprietary specifications. I think that I will turn this over to NYSERDA, and if you think I'm wrong in doing that, Saul, let me know.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, in terms of the business model of the manufacturer, to answer for themselves. If they see that there's a real opportunity here and they feel that their products can be integrated well into these solutions at scale, they may want to do the upfront work. We've convened a Manufacturers Accelerator Forum to address precisely these types of questions. There are some pretty large price tags in terms of, aggregated markets that would need to significantly impact product innovation, let's say, to a particular typology. We feel that with, combined SUNY and the affordable housing sector of New York State alone, we probably approach those levels. So again, that's an individual manufacturer to decide, but so far, many of them have been interested in terms of the envelope treatment sector, in terms of the mechanical treatment sector, and in terms of the renewable energy treatment sector. All of them, see the writing on the wall in terms of what's being done in Europe. are happy that this is being done not only in New York State, but there are, rumblings from throughout, as Greg had mentioned earlier. So case-by-case basis, but I would say a lot have shown interest so far, and that's part of what Greg had said about the clearinghouse. We're also trying to do is let manufacturers' products be known on the marketplace so that the teams can make the most informed decision and start pairing up early along these lines.
Great. So I'm going to handle the next two questions very quickly, and then we're going to wrap up. And again, you will be receiving responses to questions in some format to be noted. We've got a question from Jim about a big learning curve, and given the challenges, will the MWBE requirements maybe be relaxed? And I would suggest that because of the team structure, this is an opportunity to engage with smaller firms, MWBE, SDVOB partners within that larger team construct to create that durability and that resiliency of your practice, quite frankly. So if it could be approached that way, and if there is a reason to discuss further in the process, we have to be open to that discussion because you're right, it's very complex. And Marcus asks a little bit about integrative design process and how this will be incorporated. I thank you very much, Marcus, for putting that in. We didn't lean on that really enough in the webinar. Even in the way we're handling the process through the RFQ period and the RFP period, will be influenced by integrative design process. If you're not familiar with integrative design process, check it out. We're not talking about integrated project delivery. We're talking about design process, which is iterative and is bringing in those team skills early. We want to help teams to define the ultimate goals and to do that as a full team, to pull those stakeholders in and make sure the complexity of the problem is understood so that the solution itself can be targeted and effective. Marcus, thank you for that question. With that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I give really heartfelt thanks to Saul and Greg and Karen for being part of this panel. I find this incredibly exciting, and I hope that everyone who's been on the call has been intrigued by the possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.